I feel like the fantasy football season is broken up into two parts, the regular season and then the playoffs. But getting to the playoffs is the most important part. All bets are turned off once we get to the playoffs because you just want to get in, and that's going to give you that opportunity to go win a fantasy football championship. So I'm bringing you the top 10 running backs that I think are going to be league winners heading into the playoffs, that have the best matchups, the best schedule, and have performed the best. We started off with my RB1 going forward. It is going to be Saquon Barkley. Of course, Saquon Barkley is going to be at the top for me in my rest of season heading into the playoffs or running back rankings, as he is the RB1 in fantasy football right now. The part that I want to talk about with Saquon Barkley is the fact that when we look at the matchups that are coming up down the line, the main things we're going to see, week 14 versus Carolina, very good matchup, of course, we think is going to demolish. But once we get to week 15, week 16, week 17, what are those matchups looking like? Now, going up against Pittsburgh in week 15, that isn't the best matchup for the Philadelphia Eagles. But then he gets the Washington Commanders in week 16 and then the Dallas Cowboys in week 17. And Dallas has been absolutely atrocious versus the run. I just think the strength of schedule here for Saquon Barkley versus Carolina and then Dallas, he's got one of the best, easiest remaining strength of schedules out of any of the running backs we're going to talk about on this list. He's my RB1. He's performed as an RB1, and down the stretch, I think Saquon Barkley is going to continue to crush it. Now, we move on to my RB2 rest of season, and this is going to be Bijan Robinson, who in week 14 is going to go up against Minnesota. But then he's got Vegas, Giants, and Washington. And if we're looking at the strength of schedule here for Bijan Robinson, it's not as good as Saquon Barkley. I'm actually pulling up this rushing ability, this rushing chart off of Draft Shark's strength of schedule for running backs rest of season. Like we said, we got Minnesota, Vegas. He's got the Giants in week 16, which is intriguing. And then in week 17, he is going up against Washington. So Bijan's been involved in the passing game. He's been super elite. There's no reason for me to put him down any further than where he's currently going right now. Like we said, this 25-point day that he had in week 13 makes us feel really great because he's getting involved with the rushing. He had 26 rushing attempts, which was the highest carries that he had all season, and also got 6 receptions. So going down the stretch, as they continue to get Bijan Robinson more and more involved, I think that's just going to continue to be viable for Bijan Robinson, who's the RB2 for me rest of season. I like the metrics. We'll have to see if Michael Penix ends up taking over for Kirk Cousins at some point, but Bijan Robinson is my RB2 rest of season. Now we move to my RB3, and we're going to be talking about Jahmyr Gibbs rest of season for me. When we talk about Jahmyr Gibbs and this overall strength of schedule, it's really about the same as what Saquon Barkley is. I really like the strength of schedule going forward. Draft Sharks has it as a 12.9 percentage. The higher the percentage that we're going to talk about for strength of schedule, the better it is, because we're looking at Green Bay in week 14, but then coming down the stretch, Buffalo, Chicago, and San Francisco, who have all given a lot up to the running backs, also a lot of fantasy football points. So I think this is going to be really beneficial for Jahmyr Gibbs going forward. Now, we talk a little bit about Jahmyr Gibbs getting in the doghouse with that picture that got posted on Snapchat of the plays. Listen, that was a dumb move. We all agree. Was not great for Jahmyr Gibbs by any stretch of the imagination. Even in week 13 in full PPR on Thanksgiving when you're watching the day versus the Chicago Bears, only put up 10.4 fantasy points. But right now, like I said, I love what we're seeing from Jahmyr Gibbs. Even he still totaled over 100 yards in this bad game. He just didn't get in the end zone. Wasn't a lot of opportunities there for Jahmyr Gibbs. We'll see if he gets in the doghouse in this week 14 game, but they're going to need Jahmyr Gibbs down the stretch. He's one of their best playmakers. Have Jahmyr Gibbs as my RB3 heading into the fantasy football playoffs, helping you win a fantasy football championship. Now, the next player that we're going to be talking about as our RB4 rest of season, it's going to be Derrick Henry. And I think a lot of people would say, hey, Caleb, Derrick Henry getting pushed down the board a little bit here rest of season. And I think that's fair. Only rushed for 82 yards in week 13. He hasn't scored over 20 fantasy points in full PPR since week 9. Now, it's not terrible. He's had some rough matchups like Pittsburgh and this last matchup versus Philadelphia. So that's a little bit of concern. And especially if you own Derrick Henry and you're trying to get to the fantasy football playoffs, he is on bye this week in week 14. So it's a little bit unfortunate if you're trying to get there. Week 15, absolutely great matchup versus the Giants. Now, and I feel like the last 2 years when Derrick Henry was with the Titans, we talked about his amazing playoff schedule that he was projected to have. That was something that we talked about earlier on in the season. This year, it's not necessarily the same because you're going up against the Giants in week 15, but then in week 16 going up against Pittsburgh, and then Houston versus in week 17. So it's not the best strength of schedule. If we look over here on Draft Sharks, we're able to see that they have a negative 0.99 strength of schedule. Really, that only good matchup that we're looking at is this Giants matchup. So I am a little bit worried about Derrick Henry. Now, he is the king. He's King Henry. When the weather gets a little colder, King Henry tends to step above. But I do want to say that he's my RB4, pushed him a little bit lower down my rest of season rankings. Now, my RB5 rest of season rankings, it's going to be Devon Achane for the Miami Dolphins. And when we're looking at Miami Dolphins, their strength of schedule going forward, they got a negative 4.31. So it's a little bit even worse than what Derrick Henry's going up. And we're looking at him going up against the Jets in week 14. But then he's got Houston, he's got San Francisco, good matchup, but then Cleveland in that week 17 matchup. So when we're kind of projecting in the fantasy football playoffs how far you're going to be able to make it, not maybe the most ideal for Devon, but I do want to still, of course, have him here as this top 5 RB for me, even with the strength of schedule for Devon, because we have seen since Tua Tagovailoa has been able to get back, he's reeled off 3 straight 20-point games. So it might not even matter the matchup, but he is going to get that test versus the Jets and Houston over the next 2 weeks before he gets to San Francisco, which would be your semifinal game. So I do want to put that in consideration with Devon, but he is getting the opportunities, whether it is through the receiving work, like he got 9 targets for 8 receptions in this week 13 game versus Green Bay. So feel very confident with Devon as my RB5 rest of season based on that strength of schedule going forward. Now, my RB6 is going to be Joe Mixon. And Joe Mixon, going down the line, he's got Miami, Kansas City, and Baltimore over the next 3 games. And it's just not a good matchup for Joe Mixon. Miami, it's a good matchup, which is going to be week 15. He's got the bye this week, so Joe Mixon's also hurting you if you're trying to make the fantasy football playoffs. But then he's got in the first game of the fantasy football playoffs, Miami, it's an okay matchup. But then he's got Kansas City and Baltimore, 2 defense that have been pretty stout against the run. Not ideal if you're a Joe Mixon owner by any stretch of the imagination, but we had to put Joe Mixon here because he is sitting right now as a running back that has been pretty reliable. In week 13, put up 21.9 fantasy points in full PPR, had 20 attempts, 101 yards. He got 4 catches as well, helping you in that PPR point. So we know that Joe Mixon's been an absolute league winner for you so far, but I am a little bit worried about Joe Mixon down the stretch. Now we move on to my RB7, and I don't think I would have told you that this would have been my RB7 earlier on in the season. It's going to be Chase Brown for the Cincinnati Bengals, and Chase Brown finds the end zone in week 13, put up 19 fantasy points, 12 attempts for 70 yards, 1 total touchdown, also caught all 3 of his targets for 3 receptions for 30 yards. Now we look at the Cincinnati Bengals team. What's the concern? The concern with the Cincinnati Bengals is that they're not going to be in playoff contention and that they're going to just pull their starters, whether it's going to be Joe Burrow, whether it is going to be Jamar Chase. I don't believe they will pull Chase Brown, but of course, if we're playing with backup quarterbacks, that's not going to be ideal for a guy like Chase Brown. The matchups going down the stretch are also not ideal. A negative 3.82% strength of schedule, which, like we said, we want to see a high strength of schedule is better for running back. So the fact that it's negative going up against Dallas in week 14, Tennessee, Cleveland, and Denver to round out the fantasy football playoffs, it's not ideal for Chase Brown. But we've seen other players, like we just talked about with Joe Mixon, have a worse strength of schedule. So I do think there are ways that they're getting Chase Brown involved. He's been an elite volume getter, whether it is through carries, whether it is through the receiving game. So we got to feel very confident with Chase Brown there. But I do feel pretty good with sliding him in here as my RB7. My RB8, it's going to be Alvin Kamara for the New Orleans Saints. And we just saw Taysom Hill essentially go out for the rest of the season. Alvin Kamara totaled 119 yards on Sunday, carried the ball for 23 times, 112 yards, and he caught all 4 of his passes. Now, going forward for the Saints, when we're looking at their overall strength of schedule over here on Draft Sharks, they are at a 4.06, which, like we said, we want to see the positive numbers. So a little bit easier of a schedule for Alvin Kamara. My biggest worry with Alvin Kamara coming down the stretch is just going to be him being able to carry the load of this offense, especially with no Taysom Hill, how this offense is going to be able to get creative with these options, because we like the matchup this week versus Giants. If you're trying to get into the playoffs, you got to feel good about Alvin Kamara this week. But going up Washington, Green Bay, Las Vegas down the stretch, like I said, all okay matchups. I'm just a little bit more concerned about how this offense is going to fare as there's more injuries continuing to pile up and teams can kind of start to latch on to Alvin Kamara down the stretch. Josh Jacobs is the next guy coming in as my RB9 rest of the season. Found the end zone in week 13 versus the Dolphins. Coming down the stretch, Detroit, Seattle, New Orleans, and Minnesota to try to help you guys get to that fantasy football championship, to help you find that land, but really not ideal. Strength of schedule, according to Draft Sharks, is at negative 8.94. We like the New Orleans matchup that's going to happen in week 16, but you got to make it to that week 16 game. Going up against Detroit this week, which is not ideal. Going up against Seattle, Minnesota in the championship game if you get there. So it's not like an amazing schedule, but the volume and honestly the efficiency of this Green Bay Packers offense is what makes me put Josh Jacobs as my RB9 rest of the season. He's absolutely erupted with 3 straight over 20-point fantasy football days over the last 3 weeks. So you definitely want to have Josh Jacobs as a top 10 running back. Just a little bit more worried about his rest of season schedule. And my last and final running back that we're going to to talk about before I get to the overall rankings is going to be Bucky Irving. And I don't think enough people are giving Bucky Irving the credit that he deserves. Finally has really overtaken Rachaad White, puts up 27 fantasy points the last 2 weeks with a little bit different of overall snap share. He's still only getting about a 52 to 54% snap share over the last 2 games, but he's got a touchdown in each of those days. And coming down the stretch, Vegas, Chargers, but then he gets juicy matchups in the last 2 games of the season with Dallas and Carolina. According to the Draft Sharks strength of schedule, Bucky Irvin's sitting over here with 12.03. And if you guys want to see this strength of schedule chart by Draft Sharks, that'll be linked down below. But this is absolutely incredible with how Bucky Irving is going to be able to really help you with this, having great matchups, but he's also been an absolute league winner so far. I think he's going to continue to be that. Have him as my RB10 rest of season. Now, here is going to be a giant rest of season chart for my running backs. Like I said, I appreciate you guys for tuning into this video. Here in all 10 of my first running backs, I wanted to talk about them a little bit more in depth, but then this would be my rest of season tier chart as well. So if you like fantasy football, we will be going live tonight. We're also going to be putting out our rest of season wide receiver rankings, as well as giving you some must-start players this week, as well as answering all your start-sit questions down below. My goal on this channel is to help you win a fantasy football championship. I'm not leaving. I know it's been a minute since I posted a video. We just got back from Thanksgiving, had to make sure everything was good at work, but I'm here for you guys going forward. Make sure I can answer all your start-sit questions as we help you win a fantasy football championship in 2024. Appreciate you guys. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving week. We are pumped to continue pumping it out. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, we answer every start-sit question here once you're here on the way to 5,000 subscribers. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. Peace.